Well, today we're pleased to have with us Professor Bessma Momani. She is a senior fellow at the Center for International Governance Innovation and a professor of political science at Waterloo University in Canada. Welcome, Professor Momani. She's the author of a recent book entitled Arab Dawn, Arab Youth and the Demographic Dividend They Will Bring. It's a very interesting book with an interesting approach about the deep changes happening in Arab societies and how these changes could impact the future of these countries and the political dynamics. So first question, Bessma, what are you trying to show or to put on the table with this book, and what are the main findings of your research?
Well, the book is sort of a forward-looking exercise in trying to see what the region might look like in 10 to 15 years by looking at the youth of today. And one of the things that I find is deep intergenerational changes. This generation of Arab youth are far more educated than previous generations. They're far more entrepreneurial. They have very interesting and progressive views about politics and the relationship with government. And they're far more cosmopolitan. And this really goes against the grain of what we're so used to thinking about the Middle East, that somehow it's regressive, that there's no modernization happening. Quite the contrary. The book is based on focus groups throughout the region, personal interviews, a great deal of academic research, surveys that were done by other scholars, putting it all together to show that the region is, I think, a lot more, not only a place of optimism, but most importantly, and this is really the key message, that Arab youth are, I think, far more sophisticated than we give them credit for, and that when these individuals become the decision makers of their society, as eventually they will, I mean, it's really hard to take a 20-year-old seriously, but once they become 35 and 40 and the decision makers of their society, take comfort in knowing that this generation thinks about pluralism, it wants democracy, it wants its individual perspective respected, it's less attracted by these identities of tribe and sect and much more likely to find their community amongst people who share similar ideas. And all of that, I think, is something that we need to think about in looking at perhaps the future of the Middle East. And so the book is really an optimistic take with a great deal of emphasis on the fact that governments do have a responsibility here. This is not a book that takes away the responsibility on government. It really is Arab governments' chance to either choose the fact that Arab youth are an asset, that they are a future hope and need to be invested in, and all of their policies need to look for inclusive growth, or it can take the perspective of previous dictatorial regimes which looked at the Arab youth as a threat. And I think that is a choice for Arab governments. So the choice really is for, I think, Arab governments to hopefully recognize that the first option is their best option for their own economic growth and prosperity, and that Arab youth are ready, if given the chance, to really lead.
Mm-hmm. Well, all this you're saying must sound a bit shocking to a lot of the Western audience, getting used to bad news coming from the Arab world, terrorism, fundamentalism, violence, civil wars, sectarianism. So why would you recommend that, this kind of research and the information contained in this book, how could it affect the policymaking processes in Western countries and governments?
Yeah, two things. One, Arab youth are the majority of the population. In a region of 380 million people of the Arab world, we talk a lot about ISIS, but we give it a lot of, an extremist, a lot of credit for somehow representing the majority's view, which they don't. There are 30 to 50,000 fighters of ISIS. That's if you take the extreme numbers. That represents 0.0001% of the Arab world. Of course, if you take the 1.6 billion Muslims, it's even less. So this book is about the 99.999. I think we want to talk about the majority. We give so much, I think, of our own political space and oxygen in media and think tanks on ISIS when we don't talk about the majority. So that's one thing. The second issue is that governments need to also recognize that Arab youth today are more spiritual than ever, and making Islam and Islamicism, a enemy of the state is a very dangerous trend. And so there is caution, I think, for all of us globally to recognize that this is a region that's very spiritual and very much of faith. And so equating all Islamist movements as somehow terrorist movements is a dangerous, dangerous path to follow. So that's another lesson to be learned about that. But I think the book really takes not just an optimistic take on the region, but also shows how to understand where there are growth potentials, because there is opportunity in the Arab world. A young society is an innovative society. A young society is productive. It's a consumer society. And if we're looking at economic growth polls globally, we need to think about the reality that, Europe is aging. You look at Japan today as the classic example of an aging society. There's no more economic growth expected out of Japan as a result of their demography. But if you look at the Arab world, and obviously Africa is another great example, a young population means that it will be a place for future investment. It is a place, if you're a Western company and you're seeking opportunities, it's a place to think about investing. And that's why I think the Arab region is not to be given up on. And there's lots of opportunity there, but it's a choice for governments, Arab governments, first and foremost, to choose the right path. Second, for Western companies and governments as well to not only make the war on terror a war on Islam, and more importantly, Western companies to recognize there is a great deal of opportunity there if they deal with investing in youth and opportunity, and remembering that Arab youth are very much conscious of Western companies that do come to their countries and invest. So that's really an important take for us to be conscious of being responsible investors in the Arab world as well.
Well, if you want to know more and have a hopeful and well-informed take on what's happening in Arab societies, I highly encourage you to take a look at this book, Arab Dawn, The Arab Youth and the Demographic Dividend They Will Bring, by Professor Bessma Momani. Thank you very much, and I hope to see you soon.